Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Beatdowns with the Boz. So this week I have the Jund deck that just top 8'd the last Grand Prix in New Jersey. I was piloted by Ben Stark, awesome player, and this is a pretty sweet, uh, deck for the modern format. It's almost all 4-color Saheeli and Mardu, but the green-black deck is very good, and this deck is basically the green-black deck splashing red for Unlicensed Disintegration, which is just all around awesome removal spell. But you'll see a lot of the normal stuff. One thing that's a little unique is that this deck is playing Scrapheap Scrounger. So you're able to play a pretty aggressive game plan. Greenbelt Rampager, you can't necessarily play it on turn 1, but it is basically a 1-mana spell. Longtusk Cub, really aggressive and can snowball to a pretty large extent. Winding Constrictor ends up being a little bit of an engine card. There's a lot of counters in this deck, so things can get pretty silly if your opponent's not playing any removal. Scrapheap Scrounger is just an efficient threat that keeps coming back. Rishkar synergizes really well with Winding Constrictor, but is also just an extremely efficient card in its own right. Plays really well with Walking Ballista also. Tireless Tracker makes it so that the deck has a little bit of card advantage, which is something that you definitely want access to. Unlicensed Disintegration, just unbelievably such a good removal spell. Kill your opponent, kill your opponent's stuff, maybe kill their planeswalker. This card can sometimes just be a straight up 2-for-1. Walking Ballista essentially rounds out your interaction. It gives you protection from the Saheeli combo, and it can be a source of card advantage, a source of burn. This card is a little on the inefficient side, but it is very versatile and very good. And when you have Winding Constrictor, it's not even inefficient anymore. It's just awesome. And then to top it out, we have 2 Verdurous Gearhulk. And there's not a lot of red mana, but we do have 4 Attune with Aether, so the mana should be basically fine. In the sideboard, we have 4 Glint-Sleeve Siphoner and 4 Gonti, Lord of Luxury, when we need to be a little more card advantage orientated. We've got 2 Natural Obsolescence and 2 Natural State, so we can have plenty of answers against artifacts and enchantments. Lathnu Hellion is an extremely aggressive threat. It's going to be good if we're up against any kind of control deck. Specifically the Temur Tower deck, a lot of their spells and effects are good at dealing with 3 toughness creatures, but not necessarily 4 toughness. And then to just round out our interaction, we have 3 Transgress the Mind. So a pretty sweet deck, and I'm curious to see how you guys like it, and also how it's going to fare for the rest of this standard season. I think it'll do pretty good, though. This should be a good one. All right, so here we are in our first match. We have a baller hand. Definitely keeping that. We don't have any removal, but we have great mana. We have a bunch of creatures. We can be explosive. We can run away with game. And if we're up against a lot of removal, we can handle that also. This hand sort of has everything covered. Even though I do have the Tireless Tracker, I'm just going to play out this Evolving Wilds right away. And I do have a little bit of an interesting decision. I could choose to grab the mountain here, but I think I'll be fine just relying on the Aether Hub for energy, especially with the Winding Constrictor available. So I think likely the way that I'm going to play this is go turn 2 Longtusk Cub, and then on turn 3, pre-combat, play Winding Constrictor, play Aether Hub, get an extra energy so I can pump my Cub when it attacks. And then if I have a 4th land to play, Tireless Tracker would be the perfect thing to do on that turn. So I'm actually just going to get a forest here. And now, if I was against a control deck, I would definitely consider just playing the Scrapheap Scrounger first. But I don't really know what's going on from this Attune. I could be against 4-color Saheeli, or I could be against... Ooh, wow. So this changes things a little bit. Maybe because I have this Rishkar, I actually just want to play Winding Constrictor first. Ooh, it's tempting. I think I'm just going to play the Winding Constrictor first. Winding Constrictor into Rishkar is just so good. And if I am against 4-color Saheeli, this is going to be a great start. If I'm against Temur Tower, which is very popular online, much more popular online than it is in paper, you know, it's likely that my Winding Constrictor will just eat a removal spell. Well, this is a little dubious. I want to play my Rishkar, but I have to imagine my opponent has a Harness Lightning here. So I'm actually just going to play my Aether Hub, get my free energy, and just attack and play Longtusk Cub. Unless my opponent is considering killing my Winding Constrictor now before I get the extra energy, which is pretty reasonable. So because my opponent didn't kill my Rishkar there, makes me think that there's a chance my opponent doesn't have a removal spell. But with how long my opponent paused, I guess I can just sort of play the Rishkar. Okay. I was suspicious of a Harness Lightning, but because my opponent allowed me to get the energy from this, the extra energy from the Aether Hub, it basically caused me to doubt whether or not my opponent actually had the Harness Lightning. And this isn't necessarily a bad play. I do get to use my mana efficiently. You know, I'm playing a 3-power threat. So if I hadn't lost my confidence that my opponent was playing a Harness Lightning, I would have played the Aether Hub so I get the extra energy, attack with Winding Constrictor, and then play a creature post-combat. Alright, so this is a little annoying that I can't, or I don't really want to just attack through this. So the best move here. I don't have a Nissa or anything like that, so this Rishkar is basically gonna trade at some point. I guess I do kind of just try to slog through it. I could wait for a Gearhulk or a removal spell. I guess I just attack. This turn my plan is going to be attack, play both my 2-drops, and then on the following turn I can play Tireless Tracker plus Evolving Wilds. And I'm playing it this way just because I want to make it so it's not safe for my opponent to simply play a Planeswalker this turn. If I only played the Tireless Tracker and then played the land, sure, I get the clue, but things can get a little dicey. I'm actually starting to wonder if I'm against just some mid-range Temur deck rather than 4-color Saheeli, because Tireless Tracker isn't normally the kind of card they play. And I'm just going to crack this now. I would kind of prefer to keep the mountain a little bit of a surprise, but if I top deck a Unlicensed Disintegration. I'd prefer to be able to cast it without using my Aether Hub. Alright, we're definitely against 4-color Saheeli. Tireless Tracker is a little weird to see, but clearly what we're up against. I think I serve in with the Scrounger, but not the Tracker. And I could, if I want to use my mana most efficiently, I'd crack a clue right now and then cast the Attune with Aether. But if my opponent has the combo, my only out is to crack a clue on my opponent's turn and draw Fatal Push. So the chances of that are pretty low, but that is what I'm going to choose to do in this situation. The one thing that's a little annoying about this is if my opponent, has something that deals exactly 3 damage, like Harness Lightning, it would be able to kill my Tracker. But my opponent has so much energy anyway that my opponent will be able to kill Tracker no problem. And that will be able to kill my Tracker, unfortunately. Might as well crack a clue on the way out. I don't have Blossoming Defense in my deck, but maybe I can make my opponent think that that's an option. Ooh, Unlicensed Disintegration's a nice one. So I basically missed using a mana, but I think I'll be okay. So I'm just going to fire off this Unlicensed Disintegration after I attack. I would rather wear down my opponent's resources. So I want to force my opponent to block here rather than just being able to take some damage. And there's a chance that my opponent might make 2 Thopters and try to double block the Scrapheap Scrounger. In which case I might actually just kill the Virtuoso and the Chandra with Unlicensed Disintegration and choose to get the Scrapheap Scrounger back just by recasting it and exiling a creature from my graveyard. Once I play my land, I will have access to 7 lands for the turn. But I could also just not cast Attune with Aether this turn. Play my Hissing Quagmire, which I think is actually what I'm going to elect to do. It's a pretty reasonable block for my opponent. My opponent didn't use the energy. That's fairly interesting. And let's see, do I want to kill the Servant or the Thopter? I guess I'll go after the Servant. And definitely gonna cast this Attune here. End of turn, I can just get the Scrapheap Scrounger back. Uh-oh. Though I might just die. And I am dead. All right, next game. So, I like Glint-Sleeve Siphoner in this matchup. Although, yeah. That's probably the only change I would make. I guess Gonti's probably fairly decent. Transgress the Mind is not half bad also, but I think I'm going to be in top deck mode so often that I don't really feel the need to have it. We're just going to run it like this. Losing that last game the way that I did was a little unfortunate. But because I had the Uncracked Clues and the Hissing Quagmire, I did want to start using my mana a little more efficiently. And I believe I was tapped out the previous turn, so it didn't seem likely that my opponent would just top deck to have the rest of the combo. But maybe I'm remembering it incorrectly, and I did have my mana open the previous turn. My opponent has a Chandra. That's good to know about. Ooh, Greenbelt Rampager. So I guess I want to play the Aether Hub. And now next turn, it'll require a green mana source, but I can play the Rampager. It will use up all my energy though, rendering my Aether Hub a little on the useless side. But I have plenty of mana, so it's really not too much of a problem. And these Greenbelt Rampagers are great because a Whirler Virtuoso or a Rogue Refiner by itself can't really handle it. My opponent has a Chandra. I think I want to play this now and potentially shoot down a Thopter. There's basically no way that I'm not going to play this Walking Ballista this turn. And if my opponent just makes a Thopter, I think I'll take the chance to shoot it because it's so likely that on my opponent's turn, when my opponent plays Chandra, it'll shoot the Ballista. So this way, basically the same thing happens, but I get to push a little extra damage. And one nice thing about having this Evolving Wilds is it means these Fatal Pushes can kill a Felidar Guardian. So that's pretty cool. Might actually elect to do that on my turn simply because it can block my stuff. So I can actually attack through this Felidar Guardian now that I think about it. My opponent blocks the Ballista. I can just make it a 3/3 and then post-combat shoot the Guardian for 1. So this Felidar Guardian is not actually doing a whole lot at this particular moment. So if my opponent doesn't block, I guess it's worth it for me to simply pump this up and just push a little extra damage. I'll still have the Fatal Push for the Felidar Guardian. It's like a good spot for my opponent to cast Chandra. Probably he's going to kill my Walking Ballista, but finish a few things off. Oh, it's pretty close to dead. So basic Swamp is actually a nice draw here, but I'm still a black mana short. So my opponent has but like I guess my opponent's hand is all gas. I'm actually a little concerned about flooding out here. I can get the Scrapheap Scrounger back. And the Scrapheap Scrounger plus the Hissing Quagmire are lethal attackers, even if my opponent is able to answer my Greenbelt Rampager. So my opponent doesn't have something good here. And just a Chandra is unlikely to be enough. Like my opponent is dead due to the classic missed land drops. The easiest ways to lose a game. And that's game, folks. So for the most part, I like the way that played out. Although I think I could probably get away with having fewer fatal pushes. I think having the big power of Verdurous Gearhulk is going to be quite nice. But I do think that I don't think I want the discard. Although I could certainly understand why some people would think I'm crazy. They're like, you're dealing with a combo deck. It answers Felidar and Saheeli and Chandra, all the best cards in the matchup. But I think the matchup typically plays out more like a mid-range Jund mirror where players are likely to, have the game go long and essentially start exhausting their resources. And if I ever cast a discard spell and I don't hit something, it's one of the easy ways to lose a mid-range mirror. So I have a few different ways that I could do this. But I think that I'm just going to go Evolving Wilds, Basic Forest. I think my opponent either kept an amazing one-land hand or clicked through his or her turn. Looks like my opponent kept a one-lander. That's a little unfortunate. So I think I'm going to be fine on energy here. I might as well just get both snakes online. Game is basically over. Yep. All right, next one. All right, so here we are in our second match. Good to be on the play once again. We have a good hand. We can hit our third land drop and play Rishkar on turn 3. Ooh, that's going to be nice. So I'd have to guess that we're against 4 colors Saheeli again, but we could be against Temur. So if we don't hit our land drop, then it's going to be obviously prefer that we had played our Longtusk Cub and Constrictor in the opposite way, but looks like my opponent's choosing not to. So I really hope I hit my land drop next turn. But at least I get to play my stuff. So this makes me think that I'm up against the Temur Tower deck. To have no 3-drop is pretty unusual. Also, I believe my opponent got an island with the Attune. Yeah, did get an island. See if my opponent responds to this. If my opponent doesn't, then as soon as my opponent does cast a removal spell, I potentially use the 2 energy to make this Longtusk Cub a 5/5. Because it's going to get an extra counter from each Winding Constrictor. Well, and the fact that I got a disallowed of that is not too shabby. Still no land drop, but we do get to keep casting stuff. This is a pretty unexciting card to counter. Let's it resolve. Wow, my opponent had no spell to cast that turn. That does not bode well for my opponent. Even though I'm having some mana problems, at least I'm casting a spell every turn. My opponent is falling behind in that regard. Fine. So there's a few things that I could do here, but I think my opponent probably has another counter spell. I'm going to deny them the ability to use that and just get this Scrapheap Scrounger back end of turn. Yeah, and my opponent just did not cast enough spells. So we definitely don't need the Fatal Pushes. And we can probably trim one of the Unlicensed Disintegrations. We don't want any of the Walking Ballistas either. I think I like the Glint-Sleeve Siphoners. The Lathnu Hellions. And I think I like the Transgress the Minds here. Instead of Unlicensed Disintegration, even though Unlicensed Disintegration is awesome, I think I'd rather have Natural Obsolescence against Temur. I can keep one Unlicensed Disintegration. And that should make us about all set. I don't think I want Gonti. Although getting one of my opponent's counterspells would be pretty cool. But it's mostly removal spells, and I'm not going to have that many targets for them. And I could make use of Tower, but not that well. So I believe this is how I want to do it. But yeah, 3 discard spells, 3 removal spells, 2 of which hit Dynavolt Tower, but all 3 of these hit the blue Gearhulk, which is the important one. And I have a fair amount of card advantage. I also have a fair amount of power and speed, so pretty nice. Actually, maybe Gonti's better than the green Gearhulk. I don't have the Walking Ballistas to go with the Gearhulk anymore. And tapping out for a big sorcery speed card is not that exciting against a deck with a fair amount of counter spells. And if my opponent's killing all my stuff, then Gearhulk may end up being a little on the poor side. So it is a very powerful card, and it does feel a little wrong not to have it in my deck, but I think that's how I want to play it. And this is a fine hand. I'd really like a 3rd land that is not an Aether Hub. Didn't get there quite yet, but maybe we can do it. I think I'm probably going to be playing Aether Hub and Longtusk Cub. I don't want to blow that energy right away. Oh, actually, Scrapheap Scrounger is looking pretty nice as a first creature to play. Wow, Natural Obsolescence. Blowout City. It would have been a good idea to play the Longtusk Cub too, because it generates energy, but I thought the safest thing to do that minimized risk was to, play my creature that is good against removal spells, but my opponent had the right removal spell. And I most certainly want to get a swamp with this Evolving Wilds. Unlicensed Integration and 2 Lathnu Hellions are the only red cards in my entire deck. And I've got my Aether Hub, so and the reason my opponent is main phasing that Harness Lightning is because it's pretty common for these green-black decks to play Blossoming Defense. I have a lot of black cards in my hand. And now this turn, I really want to play this, but I'm a little worried about a counter spell. So I think what I'm going to do is play Transgress the Mind, and then decide if I want to play the other Winding Constrictor or the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. Basically plan on playing Rishkar the following turn. So, man, 2 Glimmer of Geniuses is pretty annoying. So, Glimmer, Gearhulk, Harness, Disallow. So even if I take, well, I think I'm just going to take the Torrential Gearhulk, just because it's the biggest, most powerful thing. And then I think I'm going to play another Winding Constrictor. So my opponent didn't use the disallow. And so hopefully I can hit a land drop and play 2 spells to turn. All right, so with my opponent not hitting a land drop, there's actually quite a bit of pressure for my opponent to fire off those glimmers. And I think here I want to play, I definitely want to play 2 spells. And I think I'm going to lead with the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, even though I do kind of want it to resolve. Um, Everything worked out. Just and now I have 3 threats on the board. My opponent's going to use his mana to draw cards. I should be in pretty good shape from here on out. One glimmer down. Oh, the Harness Lightning's gone too. So I know my opponent has 1 glimmer and 1 disallow. My opponent has hit his land drop, so this should be around the time where my opponent can start sequencing 2 spells in a turn. My opponent could cast a 2 mana removal spell and still have enough mana for a counterspell. And as my opponent gets closer to 6 mana, I might actually want to be careful with whether or not I draw a card from the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, because I would like to keep access to red mana for this unlicensed disintegration. A few different options here. I think the best thing for me to do is start by attacking. I know my opponent has a disallow. I feel like there's no way my opponent's going to allow this Rishkar to resolve. I'm simply going to start by attacking and see what my opponent does. I feel like there's a good chance that my opponent fires off a removal spell simply because he lets me go to attacks. My Glint-Sleeve Siphoner will be able to generate an energy and then an extra energy because of the Winding Constrictor. That's just happening. Now that I've gotten my damage in, I'm kind of free to cast this. My opponent was likely to counter it no matter what, because it is so threatening. And now if my Glint-Sleeve Siphoner survives, I don't have Walking Ballista in my deck, so my opponent can do something like stabilize at 1 life, and there won't really be anything I can do. Lathnu Hellion is a way that I might be able to punk my opponent out of the game if my opponent establishes control, but game goes long. So my opponent doesn't have Gearhulk mana, and my opponent still has access to a Glimmer. So I don't really have any information other than that. Probably a pretty smart move from my opponent. Helps ensure that I don't get to draw extra cards. So I have to imagine that my opponent is holding up a counter spell here, but if my opponent plans on stabilizing with a Gearhulk this turn, I mean, it's not going to end that badly for my opponent, but... Oh, wow. Not a whole lot I can do about that. I really hope I draw. Kind of good. Not something that my opponent can really counter. We're just going to attack with both. This way, if my opponent ever taps too low, and there's a Gearhulk in play, I can use this Unlicensed Disintegration to finish my opponent off. Getting this Unlicensed Disintegration, though, will be tricky to resolve. But my opponent has been pretty conservative with what spells he or she's willing to cast, and has held mana open for counter spells more often than not. So I feel like I'm just kind of ahead in this regard. So this is a weird way to tap for Glimmer because unless my opponent has an island. Okay. So the nice thing is that I think this means I just win now. I guess my opponent could have negate. But this Lathnu Hellion is just the perfect top deck. Even if my opponent has a 2-mana removal spell, I can fire off the Unlicensed Integration. That's match. All right, next one. All right, so here we are in our third match. We get to be on the play once again. I think it's a little debatable what we could play first. Because we have this Unlicensed Integration, though, I'm inclined to just play the Evolving Wilds and actually get a Mountain with the intention of playing Scrapheap Scrounger on turn 2 and Winding Constrictor on turn 3. If I draw a Rishkar off the top, I'm obviously going to feel like a buffoon, but I do want access to Unlicensed Disintegration. And if I don't use the Evolving Wilds in this way, it could be a long time. So there's both a Sultai control deck and a Sultai Marvel deck that are both reasonable options that we could be facing here. Opponent's looking to conserve his life total. Because of the Servant of the Conduit, I have to imagine that we're probably against the Marvel version of Sultai, not the controlling version. So one thing that's kind of cute about this is I can play this Greenbelt Rampager. Oh no! No, that's annoying. Was not expecting Harness Lightning there. So now I have no idea what we're up against. It actually wouldn't have been a bad idea that turn to just play the Scrapheap Scrounger also. I rushed through my turn a little too quickly. Looks like it's not going to make a difference. So I wonder if my opponent has white also. This seems like a good opportunity for me to get the... Okay, so this 100% is Marvel. So if I had played the Scrapheap Scrounger instead of the Greenbelt Rampager, actually would have meant I could unlicense Disintegration this turn also. So, you know, if my draw steps were different, it might have mattered. But in this case, it does not. And that was obviously a pretty good turn. If my opponent, you know, hits a Marvel, then nothing I do really matters. As long as my opponent also, I guess, hits an Ulamog or something equally devastating. But if my opponent just has more random stuff, I'm likely to kill him in pretty short order. Wow. This Whirler Virtuoso is actually big game. That is a ton of energy. And what do I do here? I guess I just begin the slog. Oh, that's going to be a good play. I don't have anything with trample. And I wish this Longtusk Cub was just a land. I also don't really want to wait. I'm just going to attack. Does that even make sense? Hold on. Hold on, Andy Boswell. Let's think about this. Put on his access to 5 thingamabobbers. I think what I need to do this turn is just cast Unlicensed Disintegration, and the most likely that's going to go in any sort of profitable way is if I put my opponent inside combat. I don't think playing Longtusk Cub is a particularly good option this turn, because that means I can't cast Unlicensed Disintegration on the following turn. And there's a chance my opponent just chumps. This actually looks fine because I can play Longtusk Cub and end of turn Scrapheap Scrounger, untap play Verdurous Gearhulk. So if I wanted to... Yeah, I think that's fine. Definitely want to get that Virtuoso off the board. My opponent just fires off another Virtuoso, though. I'm obviously going to be fairly disappointed. My opponent's certainly getting a lot of stuff. For sure. Wow. Okay. He only attacks with 2. Okay. I think my opponent forgot about the Scrapheap Scrounger and then remembered it. So I might be able to have a decent attack on the following turn, especially because I have Unlicensed Disintegration and Push. I am certainly happy that I traded off my creatures with that Verler Virtuoso while I could. Thing with another 2 Thopters here would be really annoying. Oh. Verler Virtuosos are really good at buying time. So my opponent has access to 5 Thopters, including the one in play. Guess we'll see how he chooses to block my Gearhulk. Also curious to see if my opponent has access to something like a Murder. At least I'm getting my opponent to spend a lot of his energy. So this is fine. Then I think I want to do this. All right. I was kind of hoping my opponent would do a little bit of panic and make a Thopter so my opponent wouldn't have 6 energy. That way if my opponent casts Marvel this turn, it wouldn't really be that effective. But there she is. Good old Aether Works Marvel. So if my opponent's doing this during my upkeep, that makes me think that my opponent has access to Elder Deep Fiend in his or her deck. Ooh, there's Ulamog. It's a pretty good card. So I should probably Fatal Push my Scrounger, right? So I can just get the Scrounger back from the graveyard. So I'm still in rough shape, but between getting the Scrounger back and having Hissing Quagmire in play, who knows? Maybe I'm just an unlicensed disintegration away from winning. No, not more blockers. So as it stands, my opponent has 4 blockers for my 4 attackers. Good news is, I was going to say the good news is my opponent might not be able to play Ulamog or attack with Ulamog, but fortunately that is the case. So no unlicensed disintegrations in there. That's pretty cool. Ooh, Ballista. That's a really good one. So I think I can only afford to shoot down one thing though. Otherwise, there's a good chance my opponent can activate Marvel and flash something in inside of combat. So I believe this is lethal though if my opponent has nothing. Because the Longtusk Cub can become 3 power, and whatever goes unblocked plus Ballista will be lethal. My opponent doesn't have removal spell, that's it. Right? Wow, I think we did it. We did do it. 6 it is. All right. Hellions are in. Transgress the Mind and Natural Obsolescence are in. Walking Ballista, you were great that game, but get out of here. As Fatal Push can get out as well. So feel like this is still not going to be that great of a deck against what my opponent has. Maybe I do want Ballista just to shoot down all those copters. Ugh. I think instead of Longtusk Cub, I want the Siphoner. Going down quite a bit on my artifact account. Maybe unlicensed integration is not actually that great. They just want like maximum amount of pressure. Actually, I want to do something like this. I think I do actually want to lean on my Walking Ballistas as the meaningful interaction slash creature removal in this matchup. I don't think I really have room for Walking Ballista and unlicensed integration, and if unlicensed integration isn't dealing damage, I think Walking Ballista is quite a bit better. So I could certainly see how this isn't actually the best way to do this, but They may just get chump blocked, but the haste is pretty valuable. Glint-Sleeve Siphoners are here not because of the card advantage, although I hope that is in effect, but also because they're a little more difficult to block. So Sand's a little unexciting because the double come into play tapped land. My first play is going to be on turn 3. But I'm going to have 2 draw steps to draw a basic land, and then I get to go Scrounger on turn 2, and then it's quite good. So rather than going to 6, I'm going to keep this, even though things could be a little on the slow side. I hope they're not, but they might be. Yikes. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. I think I'll just get a forest here. Stage, I think we can safely get the mountain. And this is a hand that really does want Unlicensed Disintegration. All of its artifacts and such a slow clock. So normally I would play the tracker here on the land, but I really want to play 2 spells this turn. So I'm going to go for Scrounger and Siphoner. Think of that my opponent's just going to play the 4 mana draw 2 spell. Wow, my opponent nothing. I wonder what my opponent's hand is like. Some unusual play. Whoa. That was a big draw. I have to imagine that my opponent didn't have a removal spell for Glint-Sleeve Siphoner before I drew the card. My opponent doesn't have it now either. Dude, what kind of hand did my opponent keep? This is crazy. And with these Walking Ballistas, there's basically no way that my opponent's going to be able to do much of anything. I have to imagine this game's just over. My opponent can activate in hopes to get a Deep Fiend. Nope. Oh, end of my draw step. Very fancy. Hmm. Is my opponent going to block? My opponent can safely assume that I don't have Unlicensed Integration at this point. And this Walking Ballista gives me a good mana sink to make sure that I have something to do with my mana. My opponent tries to tap it all down again. So another marvel, this will net my opponent 2 energy. Took my opponent all the way up to 5. It is a legendary artifact. But this still doesn't bode that well for my opponent. Yeah, whatever, I'll take 5. I don't care. Fine. Now my opponent basically needs to find another Deep Fiend. Or Ulamog. Ulamog would also do it. Wonder why my opponent's doing it now. I guess knowing my hand, the Deep Fiend plan isn't as exciting. So if my opponent doesn't exile any of my lands, then I can play a 3-point Walking Ballista. The one currently in play, my opponent's at a virtual 3. I could really use another Gearhulk. Transgress the Mind's pretty cool. There's a few different ways I could play this. I think I'm going to hold off on the Ballista for now. Wow, Forest. Opponent doesn't have anything. There's one Forest. Did my opponent draw a spell? If my opponent didn't draw a spell, I basically just win. My opponent did draw a spell, and I might lose. But I should be able to set myself up to win this game. And my opponent's got 2 big creatures, but they're stuck on defense. One thing that I could also do this turn is just fire up a Quagmire and attack with everybody. And if my opponent actually attack with both. But if I attack with both Hissing Quagmires and my opponent has a single removal spell, then I'm dead. So by doing it this way, if my opponent has nothing, then I win. And even if my opponent has something, I can still play the Walking Ballista post-combat. I'm going for it. Did my opponent draw Harness Lightning, or is this when they just concede? I guess it's safe for me to crack one clue. Like my opponent's wondering about his game one. Alright, well that looks like the match. Pretty sweet. Alright, match number 4. Good hand. Like it. Really like to draw a forest. Oh wait, what am I doing? No, I should have played my Greenbelt Rampager. Kind of a big mistake. Well, now that we're here, see if we can be a little greedy. We could rip a land off the top and go 2-drop Fatal Push. That would be decent. It would be extra, extra decent. Kind of like this. Ooh. That'll do. So I do this. Opponent can't block. My cub is gonna get jacked. Huh. I was a little surprised to see that block. Not gonna lie. I understand that my opponent may want to deny me energy to make that cub even bigger, but seems like a pretty intense use of resources. Not like if my oh. All right, well, it is. I mean, it is what it is, you know. It does kind of seem like just a 2-for-1 in my favor. What else my opponent's got going, but man, I'd really like another land drop. Ooh, and there we go. Alrighty. I think here it's time to play the Ballista. If I can hit another land drop and go Gearhulk. Ooh, that would be nice. So I'm definitely feeling ahead in this game. All I have is 2 Longtusk Cubs in the graveyard. My opponent's got a Servant, a Harness Lightning, and a Chandra. And it still feels like I'm ahead on the board. So this is probably a moment where I just kill the Refiner and attack. Play all my other stuff. I could use the... Yeah, my opponent's not gonna be able to hurt me if I don't hold up this Fatal Push. So by using the energy before playing the Greenbelt Rampager, I got to essentially just pay a green mana for 2 more energy, which meant more power toughness for my Longtusk Cub. So my opponent might be able to answer my Walking Ballista, but whether the Ballista's at a 1/1 or a 3/3 isn't really going to change what removal spells deal with it. Um, and you know, I could have kept my Longtusk Cub as a 2/2 and kept Fatal Push Up, but I think it's better this way. And now there's just huge upside if I can hit a land drop for this Gearhulk. Although if I do hit my land drop, I probably want to push my Walking Ballista up to a 4/4 so that Oath of Chandra can't kill it. Wow, my opponent has his own Ballista. Crazy. Did not see that coming. So now things get a little dangerous for me. I could lose on this upcoming turn. Is not the land that I wanted to see. Wow, now I could be dead. Could be dead. Nothing I can really do against the combo here. If my opponent has it, they have it. And even though I'm holding up mana, I think my opponent just has to go through the combo if it's available because my opponent's kind of losing on the board. A lot of redraws. Saheeli, are you there? We thought you'd be banned, but you're still around. Whoa, is that Ishkana? Jeez. Kind of hope I win this turn. Whoa! Had it all along. Man, I wish I still had that Walking Ballista. I am representing Unlicensed Disintegration now, which I was not representing before I went to combat, but that's game. Alright, so last time I played this matchup, I just want a lot of pressure and engine. I feel like the idea of Gonti. Opponent's planeswalkers are really good. Gonti himself is actually just pretty bad in this matchup. Yeah, I think I'm actually going to stick with Hulk. And yeah. So this innovation of playing Walking Ballista in the main, I'm not 100% sure who invented it, but I know a person on my card hoarder team, Robert Graves or Bobby Graves, had a really successful run within his deck at the Grand Prix this past weekend. It's kind of a new innovation. He might have actually invented it. I know in our circle of friends, he was the first one to come up with the idea. I think it is a pretty effective thing to do in the 4-color Saheeli deck because Walking Ballista is so good in the mirror and it can be really good against their versions of Mardu that play Veteran Motorist. I think there's a good chance my opponent just doesn't have a turn 2 removal spell, but yeah. The deck usually plays 4 Harness Lightning and 3 Oath of Chandra, so that's kind of a lot, but here I don't really want to use my Unlicensed Integration on this Servant of the Conduit just to get my Longtusk Cub a little bit bigger. It's going to be just tradesies here. And now that I have a creature in the graveyard, I do just want to send out this Scrapheap Scrounger. If there's a Rogue Refiner or a... Right. So here we get to play 2 threats. This is a great turn for us. And I suspect a Harness Lightning end of turn with what my opponent's done with his mana. So now I'm feeling like I'm in a pretty great position. Not excited about Ishkana. Ishkana plus Walking Ballista is also pretty nice. That's a good way to enable Delirium. A lot of times I like to hold onto the Unlicensed Integration and just kind of ignore the Felidar Guardian until my opponent goes for the combo, but this just does so much more damage. And since I do have to worry about that Ishkana really bogging the game down, I do want to take the more aggressive line. Nice, and we did it. So, not really going to have any changes. These Transgress the Minds are looking a little better now that I see my opponent has Ishkana, but not really sure what I want to take out for them. This is a tricky hand. Definitely going to keep, and I'm definitely going to play Evolving Wilds on turn 1. I guess I'll get a Swamp. I mean, not knowing what my draw step is, I think I'll get a Swamp so I can play Glint-Sleeve Siphoner on turn 2, and hopefully draw an extra card or draw a land and play Rishkar. Also, the Siphoner gives mana when it comes into play. You know, if my opponent's going to be playing Ishkana, it almost seems to make more sense to play Traverse instead of Oath of Nissa, but I guess Oath is still so good with just being able to cast the various Planeswalkers in this 4-color deck. And you've got Saheeli, Tamiyo, and Chandra that you're all trying to cast. Ooh, another Aether Hub is actually not that bad. And so now if my opponent doesn't have a removal spell, I get to draw a card. And if my opponent only has 1 blocker, my Glint-Sleeve Siphoner will be able to push through. Oh, no. Oath of Chandra is such a scary card to face, too, because it's so good at getting blinked by Felidar Guardian. So I can play Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, go up to 4 energy. And I can play Greenbelt Rampager this turn also, going down to 1 energy. So I'm not completely dead if my opponent kills the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner, but this also means I don't get an extra card off the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner right away, which is something that I was really hoping for. But I think it's a little too important for me to get multiple threats on the board. And I could just be dead to the combo, but I don't think I can really afford to take things slow. So if my opponent has Saheeli, whatever, I'm dead. My opponent doesn't have Saheeli, and I get to untap, maybe I have a chance. I'm not going to do nothing and hold up my unlicensed integration and just lose to my opponent's mid-range plan, which is more likely. But my opponent doesn't have the combo, so that's game. All right, so here we are in our final match. We're on the draw. We've gotten to be on the play quite a bit, but still pretty happy with this hand. Looks like a hand where it's pretty clear for me to just play Evolving Wilds for a swamp on turn 1. But what I play as my 2-drop is a little more debatable. I suppose I could have also just turn 1 cast Attune with Aether for Longtusk Cub and tried to make a 3/3 on turn 2. But I think I'd rather try to get my Winding Constrictor on the board first. And then play the Attune on turn 3 with the Longtusk Cub. Oh, wow. Well, this is pretty scary, but I do have a Ballista to help out. So I'm actually not sure if I want to kill Saheeli here. If my opponent pluses the Saheeli and then kills my Ballista and plays a blocker, things get pretty bad. But I guess the only way my opponent's able to play a blocker is if it's like 2 mana, and in that case, Fatal Push will take care of it. So things could go a little worse if my opponent has exactly Harness Lightning plus Servant of the Conduit, but there's a lot more upside to keeping my Ballista in play. Wow, Thalia. I think this is another piece of tech for the mirror. Ooh, and my Aether Hub comes into play tapped. Brutal. Wow, that's actually the perfect thing because that can't really kill it. Alright, so what do I want to do this turn? I kind of want to keep Fatal Push mana open because if my opponent does kill my Ballista, I want to be able to kill Thalia right away. So, but I also want to play a creature. So I guess I'll tune for a mountain, play it, and the Scrapheap Scrounger. My Longtusk Cub can just get so big. I should probably use the energy right now. Just make it a 6/6. This way I don't have to even worry about a Harness Lightning. And on the upcoming turn, I should have some good attacks. Thalia really did a lot to blunt my offense. Pretty impressive, to be frank. Okay. What's my opponent going to go after? Good choice. Walking Ballista would not work out very well. My opponent went for the combo. Might as well. All right, can I do this? Nice. I don't think there's any need to send anything other than the Longtusk Cub after the Saheeli. My opponent can block one of my 2-power creatures to save himself 2 points of damage. That's basically free for my opponent to do, but now if I can untap this game, seems like it would be over. My opponent does here. Actually, to be fair, I guess my opponent can actually just cast a removal spell on my Ballista and then play another Saheeli. I'm basically hoping that my opponent just doesn't have another Saheeli. Servant of the Conduit doesn't really bode that well for my opponent. All right, so this looks a lot like Harness Lightning. So I believe that means I should do nothing with my Ballista. Just attack with my Longtusk Cub. My opponent doesn't block my Cub. It can actually just do a ton of damage. And that looks like it's going to be the case. How much damage can I do here? Ooh, that's big. Dece. Definitely Dece. Wow, that is one heck of a 2-drop. So, oh no, I should have played Evolving Wild so that I'd have Fatal Push. I actually blanked that my opponent had all this energy. So, I guess this is fine though. Because I can kill one and then kill the other. And I actually didn't even need to pump up the jam on it. Yeah, actually, I could have left my opponent at 6 and just played 2 Scrapheap Scroungers. Probably would have been better. So hopefully that wasn't a punt. This Longtusk Cub is quite the abyss. Thoroughly impressed. That Whirler Virtuoso is going to buy my opponent a lot of time. Really wish I had these Scrapheap Scroungers in play. I don't think I can really attack with the Constrictor here. I mean, I can, but it's just not really worth it. So I've killed 3 out of my assumed 7 or of my opponent's combo pieces. Wow, that's annoying. Well, if I ever draw a Walking Ballista, this game's over. But if I don't draw it, it'll be a little bit of a slog. I only have 1 creature in my deck. Wow, well that's gravy. Opponent blocks. So let's see here. Guess I just kill the Ishkana and hold on to my Constrictor. But basically everything else trade. I could also hold off on that and just plan on playing the Scrapheap Scroungers back. But my opponent does have a removal spell. There might be a chance my opponent can get so that I don't get the 3 damage off on my Unlicensed Disintegration. And now my opponent's just drawing off the top, as am I, but I'm going to have a fairly big attack on my turn because I'm going to get... Oh, actually, I'll only get 1 of my Scroungers back. I still only have 1 creature in the graveyard. Maybe I should have let my Constrictor die. Oh, yeah. And my opponent has no cards, so this is easy peasy. GG! All right. So Been through this matchup a few times now, but all different variations. Yeah, I think all I do is just bring in the Siphoner for more pressure and take out the fatal pushes. I do like the idea of the Gonti, but I don't really know what I would want to take out. I guess I could take out the Rishkars. Rishkar's just so insane with Ballista. It's just like a one way the game can just end immediately. So I think for the sake of tempo, I want to keep Rishkar in. And Gonti's really sweet, but the do 3 Death Touch body really doesn't do a whole lot considering it's for the huge cost of 4 mana. I do like how my opponent's playing Thalia though. I think that card's very good. And I think it's good against Mardu and against Saheeli. Because against Mardu, it makes their Heart of Cairn draws a little worse because they can't just play a creature, Crew Heart, attack with Heart, and the creature they played the previous turn. And it also just blocks almost everything on the ground, and it makes it a lot easier to attack planeswalkers like Gideon. So here, I think that I should play the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner first, but I'm not sure. I think I'm going to play the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner first because if my opponent just has one blocker, the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner can still do some work, whereas the Longtusk Cub will not do any work. Let's see if my opponent has a removal spell here. If my opponent just has something like a Rope Refiner, I'm going to feel pretty decent about this play. If my opponent has something like a Whirler Rogue, vomit. Actually, maybe a good way to sideboard would be to play 2 Glint-Sleeve Siphoner and 2 Gonti. Good to know about. So no land drop, but you get some energy. So now I feel okay that I played the Longtusk Cub. Because whichever creature my opponent kills, the other one will be able to attack through the Servant of Conduit. So, less. Wow. All right. So this is fairly interesting that my opponent's choosing to do this. I think I'm going to draw a card and kill Saheeli. I could also add a counter onto the Longtusk Cub and kill Chandra and play Ballista. But I really want to hit my land drop. So I want to draw an extra card. Oh man, that's bad. Um, yeah. Kind of makes me wonder if my opponent just has a redundant Saheeli. I definitely want to try to kill this Saheeli while I can. Um, so I think now I play Scrounger, although I'm kind of bottlenecked on mana. My opponent could have the combo this turn. I think maybe I'll just play this Ballista. Playing the Saheeli into just open attackers that could kill it makes me feel like it was just bait. So that said, my opponent can just minus the Chandra, hit a land drop, and if he has Saheeli and Felidar Guardian, I'm toast. Oh, geez. Well, I need to draw my basic mountain off the top right now. All right, we're done here. Go to the next one. And despite seeing Gearhulk, it's not really going to change anything. Although I'm actually going to do like that idea. Especially if my opponent's playing Gearhulk. Gearhulk is great in my deck. This still leaves me with 14 2-drops, and that's not even including the Greenbelt Rampagers. Turn 2, Longtusk Cub with the mana up to pump it through an attacker is pretty sweet. And I don't have any Winding Constrictors yet, so I think getting this basic mountain is kind of the right thing to do. All right, we're going for the gold. Does my opponent have Servant of the Conduit, Oath of Nissa, Harness Lightning, or nothing? Servant of the Conduit, golden. We are doing it. We're actually really doing it with this Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. This is super nice. Yeah, this is a really good start. Oh, that Rogue Refiner isn't doing anything. I'll attack with both and just see what my opponent does. I'm not completely opposed to trading away my Glint-Sleeve Siphoner if it means my Longtusk Cub gets in another hit. And so I kind of want to get my Scrapheap Scrounger onto the board, but just so that I can deal 3 damage with Unlicensed Disintegration. But I think getting a Tireless Tracker is too good. If I do draw a basic land or Aether Hub, then I can cast Scrounger and Unlicensed Disintegration. Otherwise, I'll have that play available at the bare minimum on the following turn. You know, if I don't hit my land drop, casting Attune with Aether and 2 2-mana spells is going to be just fine. So all of my creatures are basically a big problem for my opponent. I do agree that Tireless Tracker is probably the most threatening, but Glint-Sleeve Siphoner and Longtusk Cub are both really mana efficient. So I kind of disagree a little bit with what my opponent was doing there. So I don't think there's very many ways that I can lose this game, but if my opponent just combos out, that could be one of the ways. So I think this turn I'm actually going to hold up my Unlicensed Disintegration. If my opponent does nothing, then I can crack my clue. And on the following turn, I can go 2-drop and then Unlicensed Disintegration. So all that's well and fine. Gearhulk, eh? Well, actually, I do have the clue to make Unlicensed Disintegration do a bunch of damage. That's pretty cool. So I think that's fine. So I think this is pretty easy. So if I kill the Gearhulk, opponent's at 7. My opponent has to block. So I could still lose to untapped land and the combo. My opponent needs an untapped land in the combo. So I think that's pretty safe for me to go for this here. Especially considering my I get an extra draw step to maybe draw another Unlicensed Disintegration or Walking Ballista. There's Walking Ballista. So now my opponent's just dead. Oh wait, no, my opponent is still alive because my Evolving Wilds comes into play tapped. But I think this Walking Ballista is the nail in the coffin. And I think just for the sake of having more pressure, I'm only going to play this Ballista for 1. It's really just 2 mana, make sure the combo doesn't win the game for my opponent. Should be game. Suppose my opponent may be able to have a big turn with Baral's expertise to make it so they don't lose, but have to be that, and it's not. So we did it. Sweet.